Yorkshire, England, 2016. It's 35 years since Thatcher began the onslaught of market fundamentalist policies, most commonly known as neoliberalism. 8 years after a global financial meltdown which simply gave more riches to the culprits whilst the majority bore the brunt of it in the form of a relentless slashing of social support systems. 5 years since a flurry of demonstrations, political actions and riots were exhausted and extinguished by an increasingly authoritarian government under a bloody miserable order to keep calm and carry on. And it's 1 year since this nation took a leap into fear and misery by voting the Tory government back into power, to rule for 5 more years. Is it any wonder the country feels stunned with a morbid disbelief, as if the entire nation is staggering under the effects of a bad cold, not knowing where it is or what the hell it is doing? The haves have battened down the hatches in the hope that they can ignore their potential have-not future. The army of homeless proliferates on our doorsteps, and the towns and cities have quietly begun to resemble scenes from the Third World. The Invisible Britain documentary addresses this political climate, an age of deep political pessimism. A sense of defeat clings to the streets of our congealed conurbations. A depressed and broken spirit hangs over us, instructing us to abandon the world we live in and find happiness in loneliness. The huge support that propelled Jeremy Corbyn from their relative obscurity to leader of the Labour Party seemed to be more willing for a return to political optimism, wanting it because it's not here. Fighting for Crumbs, Art in the Shadow of Neoliberal Britain, is the stories of artists who are striving for nothing but raw artistic expression at a time when we're all being forced to strive for crumbs, where wages are low and the market dictates creativity. It's not so much stories of poverty-stricken artists. It's about artists working within the crumbling remains of Britain's post-settlement optimism. Under the keep calm and carry on mantra of Tory rule, more and more artists are feeling pressured to head into more craft-based activities. This is not a critique of the crafts itself. But how can art say when it's trying so hard to sell? What value does the truth of artistic expression have in such times? Have we been reduced to fighting for crumbs?
In the art industry, you kind of have to make your own opportunities. I just wasn't really getting anywhere, applying to different exhibitions, trying to get some work in different exhibitions, mainly in London, because that's where most of the opportunity is. And just never really hearing anything. So yeah, I just went to John, and then we came up with this idea. He was really into it. We were thinking very similar things politically.
My name's John Ledger. I was born in 1984 in Barnsley. I went to college. I began making artwork in 2000, and within kind of a year of like the events such as 9/11 and just kind of a general coming of age, I swiftly started to lose that optimism which I had in the 90s, and I started to kind of become really concerned about the world. And from that point onwards, my artwork became really, really important to me. I was quite a shy person with lacking self-esteem. So kind of getting on in the world by other means, I always found very, very hard.
I'm John Wilkinson. I'm a contemporary painter with a studio in an old factory in Sheffield's industrial hinterland, and I firmly believe that the role of the artist is to hold a mirror up to the world, using lies to expose the truth, and in so doing expressing a social function that allows the individual's experience to contribute to community cohesion. I was born into a country that had only recently recovered from the impact of the Second World War. It was 1962. Austerity had ended, but the bomb-damaged buildings were still to be seen. Over the past 15 years, a people united by a belief that the new world they were building should be a better one for them and their children, had tightened their belts and worked hard, producing materials and goods for export to pay off the country's war debts and generate the funds to create a national health service, a welfare and benefits system, schools and social housing. To overcome the damage caused by the war, key industries and transport had been nationalised, full employment was a reality, and by the time I arrived, real improvements in wages and conditions meant the emergence of a new, consumer-driven economy. Life was getting better, and the many cracks in its economic base were yet to show.
My name's Connor. I'm a photographer and filmmaker. I like to take photos of pretty much anything, but my main passion is kind of in documentary photography and filmmaking. Just documenting kind of my surroundings in South Yorkshire, and austerity's affected my artwork quite a lot. Um, I mean, growing up in Barnsley, you've kind of, from day one, you kind of set with, I don't know, a sort of certain mindset against the Tories and the government and that kind of thing. And then as I was getting older, it was like in my late teens, it was becoming the financial crisis, and everyone was talking about austerity. We need to cut back on this, cut back on that, and you could really like see the impacts on the local area. Like a lot of shops were closing down, a lot of people were kind of out on the street. You could tell like people were struggling because of it. So naturally, just being into documentary photography in general, just kind of makes you want to document what's happening in front of you. Art can very be much of the time. It's, you look back at certain artworks and it reminds you of a certain decade or a certain period. And photography has a really good way of doing that as well. It's like you can look at photos from, I don't know, back in the 80s in around Barnsley and Sheffield and that kind of thing, and it's, you really do get like a sense of atmosphere, and it really, I don't know, marks that point in time. I don't think you can get through anything else. And also, the thing I really like most about photography is it's got a way of like really showing the human side to life.
And my work has become, I suppose, more political or more politicised more heavily focused in our social landscape, the social and psychological impacts of the times we live in have taken the foreground. I work 5 days a week and I just about find enough time to still do what I want to do, basically.
By the 1970s, the problems were starting to emerge. Underinvestment and rising relative costs meant that British goods were less competitive. Factory closures, rising unemployment and inflation acted as a brake on improving lives, and the basis of the economy started to shift away from manufacturing to services. Fast forward to the early noughties, we have entered the de-industrialised age, against a backdrop of shiny call centres rising from the recovered ground of toxic industry. The dead hand of the market has swept away the dust of the industrial age, and the people whose forebears were forced into urban sprawl to meet its needs are told to recast themselves as the entrepreneurs of the new Victorian age.
My name's Jonathan Butcher. I'm a poet based in Sheffield. I was born in Sheffield. I've sort of grown up here. I've been a poet now for officially for around 10 years. I sort of write predominantly for sort of underground magazines and sort of local publications as well. I'm currently a call centre worker, which is what I do. That's my day job to help me support, in order to support my writing. I've had a couple of chapbooks published as well. I do sort of readings now and then on a kind of regular basis around the sort of Sheffield scene. I'm not really much of a performer. I'm more about writing for the page type of thing. I think my work translates a lot better in that way. Okay, well, I mean, the Fighting for Crumbs, the exhibition that I'm involved in is Fighting for Crumbs. I've done quite a lot of work with some of the artists previously, John Ledger especially. It's a sort of response to how artists are sort of coping in sort of neoliberal Britain, and also the sort of Thatcherist sort of rule that we've had for the last 40 years, and how that's affected the art scenes. People like myself and the people involved in the exhibition, people from our background, I think working class people. The reason I want to take part in the exhibition is because I think that working certain people from certain backgrounds do struggle somewhat to hold down sort of jobs and also pursue any creative pursuits as well. So that's something I felt really strongly about. I think that we, people from our background, are kind of forced to make a living and to adhere to society's expectations of how we should be as citizens. At the same time, to sort of juggle that with an artistic lifestyle, I feel like it can prove somewhat challenging. My work is heavily informed by that kind of mindset. A lot of the stuff that I write about is about sort of like my surrounding areas. I'm quite heavily influenced by my surroundings. I think as a poet, it's impossible not to be. As I do live in Sheffield, which is a post-industrial city, we were sort of heavily decimated by the Conservatives back in the 80s and in the early 90s. We're still suffering the remnants of that period, and I think a lot of my work has informed that.
Dawn in this city is never crowded, but the remnants of gangs and couples litter this tiny park. I awake upon both the grass and concrete, slowly merging into this morning like oil leaking into a grit-filled rain puddle. The buildings and shops that never scrape skies, yet stand with the same pride as 20 years ago. They stand sandwiched between the rubble-filled abandoned car parks and the pubs that never seem to open when required. No wall here is too grey. The paintwork as alive as this lit street at midnight, never stained by the smog and bile. The shadows cast here almost translucent and out of focus. The pavements never claim footprints, no souls ever burnt. The blank eyes that now pass at this time never make contact, and retain any secrets hold, repudiating any reprehensible myth-making as the first bus of the day hisses slowly past, and once again leaves behind that inhalable cloud of dust.
Something that really bothers me, especially about Sheffield, is the gentrification of the city. I mean, it's ruining the city. I mean, there's Division Street that used to just have so many independent shops, and it was a really cool place to go. And now they're just demolishing some of the buildings, replacing them with luxury student accommodation, very cheap, poxy little rooms, basically. And so businesses are having to move out, and yeah, it's this big thing, but I guess it's where the money is. Fighting for crumbs, yeah, it just signifies that, really. Like, we're all fighting each other, but for what for? There's nothing really at the end of the tunnel.
So I'm Rebecca. Currently, I work as a support worker for people with autism. I also run workshops at a community library, a library that was closed down in the past couple of years in Grimsby. I'm a textile artist. I primarily work with textiles. I found in the past 5 or 6 years there's been this like craft movement, and there's been bunting and cupcakes and, you know, the Great British Bake Off and all that kind of thing. This kind of pseudo post-war nostalgia, which I find really weird, and I think it's been used as a plaster to cover up the fact that there are people struggling and people that just can't have the life that they want to live. I'm really trying my best to not be part of the problem. We have a moral duty to point at the world and say, look at this, look what's happening over here. This is what I see, this is what I think. And I just see there's a lack of that, and there's kind of almost these dead objects that are distracting.
Isolation has become a massive part of our life. Everybody comes home from the work, they have the meal, they have the bottle of wine, they watch crap television, they go to bed, and that's it.
They've got designated social spaces,
you're in
which
zone
you
7,
kind of find out
sector
about
3,
internet.
and you all will go back to your zone or your sector, and that's it.
So doesn't just sleep for mods too much and kind of becoming even more. It's like it's kind of mirroring my own kind of sentiment, that kind of music. But it's true. It's
not so much a solution, obviously, but it is an antidote.
An antidote, yeah.
I think that's
a starting point.
Yes, of course. I mean, when you put slippered mods on, all that crap you've had in a day that's descended upon you.
Oh God, yeah.
It just flows off you when you listen to them, and it's the same
Especially
thing.
fizzy.
It's the same. Well,
so I did that drawing which are in there, that one where it's built like mine shafts.
Yeah.
And that's called Long Night to Beneath the Storm. And a lot of people have shared it to say it's a bit negative. It's like, no, actually, I think opposite me. It's kind of saying it's needless. It doesn't need to be this way. But the situation is shit.
I think a lot of life for ordinary people, by which I mean 80% of the population, is bloody negative. Of course it's got to be. What else is it going to be? The way things are structured is you need to be able to earn a living somehow, and if you can't earn a living, you're fucked. And often the way of earning a living doesn't satisfy you mentally. Because so therefore you end up doing something which is puerile, pisses you off, and leads to disenchantment and more alienation, which again is the antidote of like Sleaford Mods and what you.
And this art college was such a in Barnsley. I always felt that they were like kind of breathing spaces.
Yeah.
For a lot of people who.
Well, that's what saved me. If it wasn't for those 2 years at Technium, I was in A levels and having to start again, and I'd been totally fucked. People are not only not badly educated, they're miseducated or not educated at all.
I feel it's much easier to change when things around me look like they're going to change. You know, these plants which flower like once a generation.
Yeah, like a desert
That's
bloom.
almost like an analogy for English optimism.
Yeah.
Community is dead. Hate and distrust, the message that obscures the wholesale theft of public property, an individual failure offered as the explanation for an epidemic of poverty. In place of collective agreement has come individual negotiation. Within the workplace, we compete with each other for the crumbs that fall ever more slowly from the tables of the powerful. Everywhere the message is sell, 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 and above all, sell yourself.
I find it very hard in this time to kind of create something that shows a positive alternative. The mood of the time we live in is very environing, and it sometimes it feels like there's not much hope in the times we live in. I really want to have that optimism back that I had in certain points in my life. If it felt like things were going to change, I know my own mood would shift. When I can feel like an horizon opening around me, horizons will open within as well, and that for me is like what I long for in society and in the world, really.
The entrepreneurship of the self is as much a reality for artists as for any other worker, and inevitably it has compromised the focus of art. Rather than being a mirror of the world, art has become its embodiment, easily produced, easily consumed and easily discarded, a commodity to go with the decor, the sofa and the curtains. Artists compete with each other for sales against the noise of the internet, or find their way into galleries that stifle their creative expression in favour of repeating that which has sold before.
I got asked to do something to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Red Shed Labour Club in Wakefield, which my friend Sandra, who were around when Red Shed started, we're talking about the optimism, the political optimism of the 60s when it began. That's the one thing that I feel like I've grown up in a time which there hasn't been that optimism that you can change the world but you know, we can work together to make the world better. I'm not saying individuals don't try to do that, and you know, I respect them for doing so, but it felt like I've always felt like I grew up in an age where people have just told me there's nothing you can do. It's a bit of a kind of people have given in to that, but that's the world I feel like I've grown up in. Specifically after the 2015 election results, we've been reduced to this competitive state between each other for nothing much in return. So bizarrely, when the Tories got back in, although it were on social media, it felt that people were coming together out of sheer despair, and there was strangely an optimism in that people were speaking to each other for the first time. But it fizzled out, and then there was the thing with Jeremy Corbyn. So there is now and again there's this feeling that the mood can shift, but most of the time it still doesn't feel like it's there.
Through the media, we were offered an alternative. The anti-cult of celebrity has permeated our culture. Gambling, the lottery, talent shows and social media access sold as viable options to those in the bleak landscape that is all that remains of the lives and communities of the de-industrialised zone.
Being a photojournalist or a documentary photographer, it always brings you out of your comfort zone, like somewhere, like on a very basic level. I mean, it forces you to go up to strangers and ask them for pictures. But when you're doing, like, I don't know, your own personal projects or a news story on like quite a serious issue or something that's going on, it kind of you have to go out of your own community, out of your own little bubble, and kind of see what is going on with your own eyes, like in the rest of the country. And that's a good thing. You experience so many like different walks of life. Like you'll see, I don't know, hang around with like at some sort of like rich fancy wedding one weekend, or photographing in like a hotel opening or something like that, and then the next like you're on some like council estate or investigating like a really horrible crime or something like that. It makes you realise like how warped the media actually is, like how things are spun on all sort of levels, and you'll go to certain things to like document it and photograph it, and you'll see that same event represented in the media, and you'll just be like shocked at how they put this like London perspective on it or something like that. And I don't know, it's a big problem with the media in this country, I guess, because it's like owned by just a pocket of people. It's the whole industry. I mean, it's not even just the newspapers, it's the people who supply the newspapers as well. All the agencies owned by massive corporations. And it does, I mean, Getty Images, which is the main photo agency in the world, it was owned by like Carlyle Corporation, which is a private equity firm that supplies some of like huge amounts of weapons, and they make money from building infrastructure in countries that have been war torn. And now they send the photographers over there to document it. It's just been monopolised to such an extent that I don't know, it's a hard situation to want to strive within the mainstream and like retain some sort of, I don't know, like ethical balance. But having saying this, there is, in today's modern age, there's like a big backlash against that, like with the internet and how much like cheaper and easier self-publishing has become, and how easier it is to be connected with people across the world, is giving like normal people more of a voice as well. I think that's like a positive of today's times, and something that could potentially change things in the media. There's like a certain like anachronistic level to the internet, and like no government can control like what goes out there, and that can have like a positive outcome in the future. The thing that ties us all together with the Fighting for Crumbs exhibition is we're all just a bit frustrated and pissed off with the current government in particular, and people are just expressing that all the time, like whether it's through like music, or in our case we do it through art, but with myself being into photography as well, it kind of spills over all these things, because I mean I love music, so I'll document a lot of music scenes throughout Sheffield and South Yorkshire. And the current situation with austerity and the Tory government at the moment is kind of reflected through music scenes as well, and it's bred like a punk attitude again in people who are kind of sick of glitzy chain clubs like your Pop World and I don't know, just your standard kind of Wellington Street bars or whatever, and they're just kind of like wanting to do their own thing, and I really enjoy kind of documenting that because it shows like a positive nature to the human spirit. Like, all this shit's going on, but people are still like passionate and creative.
Austerity is back, but with an economy based on the creation of debt and the wholesale dismantling of the welfare state, it looks like it's here to stay. The services we struggled to build in the 50s cannot be so easily replaced once gone. But with reference to the supposedly wonderful days of industrial capitalism and empire, we are exhorted to make Britain great again, while as a nation we draw ever inwards, closing our borders and allowing voice to the rhetoric of division that culminated in the very war that we never wanted to see again. Truly, the wheel is turning.
You know, I do have kind of habits that aren't positive, which if I'm being honest, I struggle to find enough free will to change, because my work feels like my one bit of free will. My one bit of true free will is my work, in my opinion. It's like that. That's like my raw, expressive stance. Regarding the people, the characters in my drawings, I mean, I am one of those characters. My drawings are in no way preachy, self-righteous. I am one of these feckless characters in my drawings. A capitalist society tends to shape us more towards not only selfish and greediness, but inevitably self-destruction. As a species, we should try to search for a common good. I don't think that has to kind of impede on our own enjoyment of life, because I think sometimes the selfishness of capitalism, but capitalism fostered, actually makes us more miserable in the long term.
I think that whenever there's any kind of social repression from a government, which we've had, I mean, on the both, you know, the last governments for the last 30, 40 years, there always is kind of like a slight uprising in sort of art movements, I think purely through boredom, which is a result of poverty. You know, people feel angry, feel frustrated, so they'll vent that through artistic means rather than just doing it vocally or through other sort of ways.